I always get excited coming here. It's this bit now. It's this last stretch of road when I know that in a minute I'm going to see, particularly when the sun's out, I'm just going to suddenly see a ripple of white reflection. There's this little bit of the Wild West for a week every June. I don't know, it cheers me up. A lot of the people I grew up around reminded me of cowboys, and that reminds me a little bit of the Wild West, you know. Can you see that? Just peeking through them trees? Appleby Fair, Gypsy Land. I'm Damien Labar. All right. And I'm from a family of travellers. We're Romany people, those travellers descended from the Gypsies who first arrived in Britain 500 years ago. And we're still here. Even though our lives, like anybody's, have moved with the times. But the 1960s were a difficult decade for us. For much of it, we were like outlaws in our own land.
They just don't want us in the country. That's all it amounts to. They just don't want us in the country.
The women, they go in fear all the time the gypsies are there.
Fear of what?
Fear of molestation.
Old prejudices and new legislation nearly wiped out our nomadic way of life. Until then, our identity was tied up with being on the move. That was set to change.
I like to settle down and go to school.
You'd like to what?
Settle down and go to school.
I'm going to show you what happened then and how we're still moving forward. This is my take on a very British history. Do you remember the first time you ever cooked that, Nan?
Yeah, when I was a little girl. Proper old traveller's meal, Damien.
Is it easier cooking it in here or over the fire?
In here. Get smoke blowing in your face when you're cooking it on the fire. Not very nice, Damien. But still, you get there in the end, don't matter what. You survive whatever you have to do, don't you? At the end of the day. Well, we did. I survived, I'm still here, Damien. We'll wait for that to cook a bit, then put the mushrooms in.
Now, didn't you say when you were little you'd speak the Romany language more?
Yeah, we did, yeah. Well, you see, when we were at home years ago, when I was a little girl, we had to speak it. If somebody come to see my dad, he'd say, keep quiet and, you know, kaka, rocker. We wouldn't dare say anything when he was talking to somebody, otherwise we could have got hiding. But my dad brought us up with very good manners and that. Even though we were living in tents and caravans, we all had manners.
But it's funny, I'm looking at that. Nan taught me the words for most of the things in that. So we call that a Joey Gray. And you've got puvies, ball of mass, purums in that. But then I don't know what you'd call tomatoes. That's the first three things I said is potatoes, bacon and onions.
Yeah,
I would be here a long time saying all the words you taught me, wouldn't we?
Yeah, oh yeah, we would be. I taught you to play the spoons, didn't I?
Yeah.
Some people, if they know you're a gypsy, they don't want nothing to do with you. I don't know why. I mean, you haven't done anything. I mean, I've never done anybody any harm, and I've never committed a crime in my life. And I can honestly say that. So, and then they turn around and call you a gypsy. They're probably worse than what we are. I know some of them are slumbags, some people that live in houses. Well, they're not so nice as what we are, at the end of the day. See, that's cooking all right now, Danes?
Yeah.
Won't be long.
This woman's home is a shack in the enclosure. She cooks over a crude open fire. Nearest fresh water for a cup of tea is 2 miles away.
Romany Gypsies arrived in Britain 5 centuries ago, after migrating across Europe from the north of India. Their way of life changed little,
even when Nan was on the road until just after the Second World War. Travelling for her meant living in wagons or tents and shacks. Families were often large. Everyone was expected to help with chores and earn money to live. Manual jobs and things to sell made from what was around them allowed gypsy people to be self-sufficient and mobile. Life outdoors revolved around the fire. We call it the yog. It wasn't just used for cooking and keeping warm. It was where stories and knowledge were passed on through the generations. And fire often figured in unique rituals for funerals and weddings. And always there was an obsession with horses.
Thank you, Damien.
Nan moved off the road partly because she got married, but there were big changes ahead for the next generation after her. Even bigger pressures, both from inside and outside, that caused many Romany people to fundamentally change the way they live. And that's something that I'd like to explore, find out what was causing that really and why it accelerated at such a rate, particularly in the 1960s. It seems to be a sort of key moment for our community.
The lure of town life is slowly winning over the nomadic campfire existence. It's a hard life, and the younger generations don't take to it as easily as their elders did. For many, a proper roof over their heads and schooling for their children are the accepted ways of life. Now, many of their encampments are a headache for local authorities. But there are few places left for them to go.
I would say I grew up most of the time in a fairly typical English Romany environment, traveller environment, which was that we had a piece of land where the family business was carried out, which in our case was mostly roofing and flower selling. We had a house on that land, but we also had trailers which people lived in and out of. Once the children got to teenage, they'd usually have their own trailer as a sign of independence. And we had animals, horses of course, but also other farm animals. And that's the hinterland to my life.
For hundreds of years, gypsy people were an essential workforce, especially in the home counties. I'm heading to Kent. The first ever survey of gypsies was carried out here in the 1950s. 2,500 nomadic travellers worked the land during the summer.
How you doing, Uncle?
Hello, Damien. How are you, mate? Long time no see, bub. Yeah. How are you?
Joe Jones isn't my actual uncle. I use that as a mark of respect for my elders. He's a Romany man and grew up around here in the 1950s.
This must bring back a few memories, Joe.
Oh, yeah, mate. Yeah, and it's all good memories too. Hopping. It was really a good time. Lots of families all mixing with each other. And I remember them cutting down the vines and that, and then dragging them to the women. And the women would be sitting there, scratching them all off and put them in bins.
So the children mucked in with the work as well, Joe?
Yeah, mate. I mean, it was all piecework then as well. Even this, you know, you was paid by the poke. Your granny, everybody would be there. There'd be an old yog at the end there with a pot on, and your trailers and all that will all be just round the farm here. And there'd be all the different families, about maybe 20, 30 families, all stopping here.
The hop fields of Kent become once again a holiday ground for thousands of Londoners. On again, as ever, is the yearly pilgrimage which has been a Cockney custom since the turn of the century.
But lots of Londoners were regular pickers alongside the travelling people. You know, all the travelling people, all the gypsies, the Londoners all lived cheek by jowl in these fields. I said I'd get a metal detector. I bet you'd find some gear up here.
Would do,
that's
yeah.
still been left. But you'd find a bit of harness and bits and pieces, a bit of horse brass.
Well, I went to where they used to stop Thorny Hill in the New Forest, is where there was a compound there.
That's right, yeah.
And the amount of stuff in there you wouldn't believe. I found an exhaust off an old Austin, pairs of boots, whiskey bottles, sewing machines. There's obviously all the stuff the travellers had there. But where they moved off so quick, it's like doing archaeology there. So Joe, what did people do when it was coming to the end of the summer, the hopping time and that?
Well, they had their regular stopping places. Some people stayed on the farms, some people didn't. But they had their regular stopping places, like the woods here. Dartford Woods was a place where families that got on together, they all pulled up in here. Out of sight, out of mind, that was the concept of it all. There was quite a few stopping places in North Kent, on the boundary of London, really.
Bromley, now a London borough, was part of Kent in the 50s and early 60s. Like the Woods, it too became a winter base for many travellers. In the shadow of 2 gasometers, people rented cheap ground at Cork's Meadow. It was a legal place to stop for scores of families.
Why did they come and stop for the winters on the edge of a town in a place like that?
Because in the winter time they had to earn a living. So urbanisation meant that there were potential customers. They would be doing some pegs, baskets, flowers, and the women would go out and the men would be making stuff. They might even get local employment, you know, on the building sites. And don't forget, when all these estates was all built, a lot of them travellers would have been working on these projects.
But the boom in post-war construction was soaking up land everywhere in the southeast, and Cork's Meadow was sold off for development.
So what happened when the meadow was closed and the travellers came off of there?
That was when you started seeing that the gypsies and travellers alongside the road, because there was nowhere for them to go. Unauthorised sites, on grass verges, anywhere they could get. They just had to pull wherever they could actually get a stop.
How many children have you?
3.
And how often have you been shifted recently?
Well, this is like 3rd. No, 3 times.
Since when?
Since last Friday, I think it is.
Where will you go this time?
Well, we don't know. I've got to wait till my husband comes down and see some work before I can go.
You ain't doing more, Mrs. Fair. The doctor's coming to us. I'm waiting for Dr. Green there.
Now, I've just seen you refuse to be moved, Mr. Mitchell. What are your circumstances?
Well, I've been in a little hospital for 7 weeks. I've had 2 nasty operations. I am in the condition to be poured off. There's my wife lays ill with the flu, Dr. Tennant her, in the caravan there.
The authorities had little sympathy for gypsies living on the margins of a modernising Britain. Some were already moving into houses during the winter. But many of those who couldn't afford rents or preferred the nomadic life they already knew had no option but to stay on the side of the road. Other pressures were building. Jobs on the land were being eaten up by technology.
But this year, the machine age has come to the hop fields too. A metal dragon that can take the place of 300 human pickers.
And the other old sources of income were becoming obsolete. But now with trucks and trailers, gypsy people could embrace new trades, like dealing in scrap metal.
It's not that, you know, gypsies and travellers were desperate to always sell pegs. It's to be able to do something that you can do while you're mobile. And they start moving into sort of different kinds of work. So classically, as well as the sort of scrap metal dealing, instead of dealing horses, you know, some people are moving into fixing and mending cars and selling those. In other cases, people are moving on to doing things, you know, I think of like lopping and topping and tarmacking of drives. And those are the kind of jobs that you can be in one area, do those for a bit, and then move on to somewhere else. So in that way, it's the same pattern of work that gypsies and travellers have been using for centuries. It's just got a different content.
Well, where do you think you got there from?
I said I drove on the way.
All sorts. And you, how much you want for it?
Say £3 for it, and I'm actually wrong for it.
you go, please. Sit down. That's it, sit down.
I like to be free. I like to be my own boss, do what I like, go when I like, come back when I like, you know. As long as I just get a bit of a living, you know, I'm quite happy. I ain't a rich bloke, and I never will be.
The wider population isn't used to seeing gypsies doing that kind of stuff.
No, exactly. And so you start getting the, well, I don't mind the real gypsies because they live in a boat-top caravan and they come round and sell pegs and they used to help with the strawberry harvest. Now we've got these other types of people who they turn up in their lorries and they've got lots of scrap. They're here for ages and then they just go again. And so it's a very different kind of picture that people have in their heads, and they don't necessarily associate it with any sort of the positive ideas that they might have got about gypsies and travellers.
My mother told me I never should play with the gypsies in the woods. If I did, then she would say, naughty little girl to disobey. My mother told me I never should play with the gypsies in the woods.
The word gypsy was once used as a term of abuse. It can still cause offence.
You can call me a gypsy because I don't mind. But again, it depends on the context, the tone. You know, if someone says to me, oh, are you a gypsy? That's interesting, then that's fine by me. If they go, you're not one of the gypsies, are you? Well then, you know, obviously that's a different use of it. So, the word Romany is a more dignified word. It's a word that comes from our own language, unlike gypsy, which is a misnomer from another language. Romany comes from Rom, an old Indian word for man or husband. I just tend to avoid Romany in certain contexts because I don't like how easily confused it is with Romanian. And it's a completely separate word. So it's complicated.
This site here has been a permanent site for nearly 5 years now. But now the Darenth Parish Council are trying to buy the site. And as soon as they've done so, they're going to turn the gypsies off.
As the 60s progressed, attitudes were hardening towards travellers throughout the home counties. Caravans near built-up areas were a source of tension with local residents. Even camps that had been tolerated were now being singled out for eviction. Darenth Woods, known as Dartford Woods to many, was an unofficial home to 100 families. In 1962, in the middle of winter, the gypsies were thrown out.
You'd got a community of gypsies and travellers who'd been in one place for quite a long time. The children were going very happily to the local school. They had very good relations with the school teacher, with the local vicar. The council decided that the site needed to be cleared, and Norman Dodds, the local MP, got involved. There was quite a lot of high-profile campaigning, and there were local people who supported the presence of gypsies and travellers there.
Most of the caravan colony here had lived by collecting scrap metal. Now they say they'll have to go on public relief. It all seems a pity, for while the gypsies cling to their traditional way of life, it's hard to fit them into the second half of the 20th century. For the time being, they camped on the road between Dartford and Rochester. Where now?
What they said was, wherever you tow us and put us, that's where we're staying. We're not moving. They were all stopping.
Actually along here?
All along here, right the way up. All the trailers was here, all the way along the A2 here.
Though the new site's a long way from being ideal, in fact it could hardly be more unsuitable, they're in no hurry to move. The authorities who got them out of Darenth Wood made no other provision for them. So here's the extraordinary state of affairs, gypsies camped on a busy main road.
And of course this was the main road then, so it must have been incredibly dangerous.
Well, it was. It was the very first time, really, of people complaining about gypsies alongside the roadside. It was really unusual up until then, because gypsies never hardly stopped on the road. They hid in the woods.
It wasn't exceptional because this is the kind of thing that was happening right across the UK. It's sort of crystallised in some of the public's mind that there was actually a problem for gypsies and travellers, not simply the gypsies and travellers were the problem. And the issue is that while people started to accept that, nobody wanted to act. Nobody wins votes by saying, yes, we're going to have a gypsy and traveller site in our local area.
The campaigning MP Norman Dodds helped secure a temporary site for some of those evicted from Darenth. But elsewhere in the home counties, strings of trailers continued to pull up on main roads. A new piece of legislation had added to our problems. The Caravan Sites Act of 1960 tightened up planning laws. Now any caravan could only be on land that was officially licensed, and commons outside cities were put off limits. But there were signs that councils now recognised the need for safe places for travellers to stop. West Ashford in Kent pioneered the first purpose-built site in the country.
This type of camp can be an extremely satisfactory way of providing winter quarters for the time being for these people.
We've had complaints from one of the local farmers of sheep worrying by dogs, and there was one complaint of on the road to the camp where a nuisance was caused one day by tipping all the people's dustbins over.
But nothing very serious?
No, nothing really serious.
How do you like living in this camp?
Well, it ain't too bad, but there's some kind of people what don't like us, you see. We don't like them and they don't like us.
Who are they, the people in the village?
Yes, that's right.
Do you ever go down there and mix with them at all?
No, sir. Only just as they call your names when you walk by, like, you know.
If some of the gypsies were given a council house in this little estate here and came to live near, how would you feel about it?
Well, I wouldn't like it really, but if it had to be, well, I should hope that they weren't too close to me, you know. If they didn't interfere with my children, well, I wouldn't complain to that extent.
But you sound
But I don't want them here, you know.
But there was still one place where gypsy people were, and still are, always at home.
His name is 50 Shades of Grey.
Owning a horse is still deep-rooted in our culture. And the horse fair at Appleby in Cumbria is still a big fixture in many of our diaries.
The horse, that recurring gypsy theme. He can't get away from it. 1,000 years of wandering with horses for companions, horses for stock and trade. The diesel truck, the pile of scrap iron, that's the reality. The horse is still the dream. And Appleby Fair is the climax of the English gypsy's year, the unifying experience that keeps him conscious of his heritage.
My family have been coming here for years and years, since the 60s, all the way from the south coast. So people feel very emotional about this place. And it's amazing to see this stuff. And people on verges, campfires, under the stars. What can you say? If you don't think there's a place for that in the landscape and in society, I'd say you've got to have a look at yourself, because a country needs that kind of freedom. Not just a nomadic people, but a whole country needs to know that it's possible to do that stuff. Lay-by closed. They don't want us pulling up here.
The fair isn't just about horses. It's a grand social occasion where family and friends catch up with each other and where everyone's on show. And lovingly restored wagons are on show too. They're highly prized reminders of how past generations once lived.
That's like looking at a piece of heaven.
Watch your back!
Appleby's a true people's fair. Billy Welch has been at the heart of organising it for 20 years.
He's a proper star, this one. He likes to be on the telly. It's a lovely morning, Damien, isn't it?
Beautiful.
It's so important, and this place is sacred to gypsy people and travelling people. It's the only one of its kind on the planet Earth. You see, we've had a bit of an advantage in this country compared to the rest of the European gypsies, and we've managed to hang on to our culture and traditions in a way that the rest of them haven't. And Appleby is a perfect illustration of that. Just look around. This is pure gypsy. This is more important to our children, would rather come here than go to Disneyland in Florida. If you give them the choice, there's just no contest. It's more important than Christmas. It gives us a sense of place, a sense of belonging, a sense of ancestry.
How much do you think it's got to do with the horses, Uncle Billy?
The horses isn't just a tradition, it's inherent, it's in the blood. The greatest cavalrymen in the world were gypsies. They used them in the First World War. My grandfather lost his leg in the First World War. And when they'd round all the young gypsy lads up and say, right, they were put in charge of the horses because it's in the blood.
One year, I'd love to come up here and buy an horse and ride it home, but it's a long way home. Best part of 400 miles. It'd be a bit longer on a bridle way, wouldn't it? So whether that'll ever happen, I do not know. It's a nice dream, isn't it? Nice idea. We call this the flash, or the flashing lane. It's got an element of speed to it, that name, just the sound of it, the flashing lane. But flashing something is you're flashing it to sell it, you're showing it off, you know. And a bit of flash, it's like a traveller's term for something that you can show off. It's a spectacle, isn't it? It's a spectacle of English rural life, of gypsy life. And that's why I think it will continue forever. What is it that brings you to the fair, Uncle?
Well, you come here and you see same faces every year, which you haven't seen for a year, so you catch up. And when you're younger, you have a beer, but I don't drink now. When I was young, so I had 10 pints of Guinness, you know what I mean? And go back. But now I have a cup of tea. Because you get a headache in the morning, don't you? You go in and you end up buying an horse. I've been down the river down there, and we've been drinking in there. And they bring the horses in the pub. So,
there's nowhere else you're going to see
because there's going to be a deal, and so what they do is they bring them in, don't they? Open for a deal. So that's what they do. Yeah. I used to go to all the fairs what were around, but there's not a trade anymore like there used to be.
One word, no, Mrs. Red. 100 quid for it.
The gypsy can't get away from the horse. He trades in horses, he loves horses. If he can afford it, he keeps a horse or two in a field somewhere just for his delight.
And that's why they call me.
Look at it. I've never ever seen it like that. ever. You've come to the busiest Appleby Fair in history, I should think. I think if you were to make this black and white, you'd struggle to tell what year it was. Just a tradition, riding in and out the River Eden. I think you could call it a bit of a baptism for the young uns into their adulthood. It means something special to us. I can't quite sum up exactly what it is, but it's not just washing a horse, put it that way. You know, our association with this town and this river goes back centuries. So it's a symbol of continuity as much as anything else. This is a part of gypsy life. This is gypsy land, you know.
Appleby Fair escaped permanent closure by local authorities in the mid-1960s. But at that time, anti-gypsy sentiment was gathering momentum throughout the country. A government survey in the 60s estimated there were 15,000 gypsies and travellers in caravans in England and Wales. That figure included travellers from Ireland, who were now arriving in Britain in increasing numbers. Gypsy people looking for places to pull up were now a very visible presence in the home counties.
"60 families in a field just by the southern end of the M1 motorway mean a big headache for Hertfordshire County Council, who own the field. Some months ago, gypsy families began to move in. No good just shifting the headache somewhere else, so the council make the site temporarily official in spite of local protests, while they arrange a permanent one."
But gypsies in Hertfordshire had an unexpected ally. The romantic novelist Dame Barbara Cartland.
Everyone was against the gypsies. There's a kind of medieval fear about people, which makes them say, the gypsies must go away. I don't mind where they go, but they must go away.
My mother was trying to boast to them morale, tell them they were wonderful, and they must persevere, and they'd win in the end. She said, I vow that I will give them the caravan site that they want. And you know, they all loved her parasol. She always went up when the sun came out.
Gypsy families were being thrown off what was accepted as common land that they'd used for decades. Now Dame Barbara, who was a county councillor, took on the battle to find them somewhere permanent to stay.
She watched the caravan going into the distance with despair on the faces of all the gypsies. And that was when all the problems started.
People offer all sorts of reasons why they don't want a gypsy site near them, but I mean, you've referred to it as old-fashioned racism, really, and your mother compared it to the situation in the southern United States.
It was definitely prejudice. It was a really very nasty feeling, but they would say, you know, it's not in my backyard. Go off somewhere else, but don't come anywhere near us. My mother had a lot of hate mail, and people were rude to her, but she persevered. She was not one to be deterred, my mother, in any way. She stuck to her guns.
After a public inquiry, Dame Barbara and her allies secured a piece of ground on the outskirts of Hatfield. The new residents christened it Barbaraville.
Over Hatfield Way live some contented Romanys, helped by well-known novelist Barbara Cartland. She was able to have the site allotted to them, but it was little more than a mud patch when the gypsies moved in 6 weeks ago. For Betty Buckland, her family, and all the others, this is a new way of life, and they say they prefer it to a kind of existence they've always known.
The extended family unit is clung to for much longer amongst gypsies and travellers, and is seen as an important part of your strength. A lot of gypsies and travellers still believe in living in the extended family, and in many cases that's more important than travelling. And I've sometimes thought that really the travelling was a means of keeping the family together as much as anything else, because you travelled as a group. And so stopping as a group was fine because you were still a group.
The lives of gypsy children on the road in the 1960s were constantly disrupted. Being moved on so frequently was taking its toll on a new generation that had grown up knowing little else.
They used to move as the police did, and if my daddy wasn't there, they used to pull us away with a tractor and break my mummy's fingers. They didn't care at all what they did and what they didn't. And my mum used to say, don't do that. Just fling the things anywhere. And my sister and that, and she used to run about, and the children all screaming, and that we used to be frightened of them.
Before you came here with your caravan and your mother and father, where else had you lived?
At Watford, Uxbridge, and Southend, and Peeping. There's Colchester.
Do you like moving about like this from place to place?
No.
You don't?
No.
What would you like to do then?
No. I like to settle down and go to school.
You'd like to what?
Settle down and go to school.
Why would you like to settle down and go to school?
Because I can be reading and write.
Why do you want to learn to read and write then?
Because I won't be a fool then, would I?
Now will you make me 9 o'clock?
But life on the road was hard to square with regular schooling. Even segregated classes for gypsy children remained a challenge, both for them
That one's wrong, and that one, and that one.
and for their teachers.
During the course of the afternoon, it was our job to settle them down in desks, which we did after a time, and finally we managed to get them sitting two to a desk and all facing the same way. When they first came, I was just, "Hey, you!" And after a time, they began to recognize that I had some authority, and then I became plain Gov. But now they in fact call me, "Hey, Ed Mister." So some progress has been made.
Are you glad you came?
Yeah!
You enjoy it, do you?
Not all children were so lucky. Mainstream education struggled to help many of them unprepared for school, even if they got there. Perhaps self-help was the answer.
The school isn't much, a £25 caravan. The gypsies found the cash and must also find their own volunteer teachers.
How many?
3.
Good.
So-called caravan schools brought the classroom to where gypsy people lived.
Mandy Jones to Booty with my dad to Kursasta from the Gorges.
When Thomas Acton was a student in 1967, he volunteered to teach on a temporary site in Essex.
How did you approach teaching the travelling kids, Thomas? Basically drawing, making drawings and labelling them. A certain amount of number work, learning the alphabet, learning tables and reading stories. I hit him so hard that I pocketed his jaw.
Two of the children Thomas taught were Bill Cooper's brothers.
Same as all travellers, when he first come there, everyone was a bit suspicious of him, didn't know him. But we come to know him, and I've got 2 younger brothers, and he taught them. We got to respect the man, you know, and he done a lot of good there, because like you say, the schools wouldn't take the children, and he come there and he taught them. They can both read and write anyway.
The first time I actually met gypsies living on the site, and I was scared stiff, absolutely scared stiff. But I was young then, right? I mean, I was just 18.
While the government started leaning on local authorities to provide places to stop, gypsy people themselves were becoming more organised. They were now standing their ground when the bailiffs and police came calling. The man under the Land Rover helped bring about the change in gear.
Pinto var, en av tuke.
Shook up.
Grattan Puxon had lived with travellers in Ireland. He came back to rally the first so-called National Gypsy Council at this pub in Bromley, on the outskirts of London.
It just happened that one of the nearby pubs had no gypsy sign on it, painted on the outside door. So that was a kind of red rag to me. So I went in there and said, I'm organising a human rights meeting, and we want a hall for maybe 40 or 50 people. And I gave the man £10 and got a receipt off him. And there we were booked for the 10th of December, 1966, Human Rights Day. Somehow the word got around to him just a couple of nights before, and he came to my trailer begging that we could cancel that booking. I said, no way. We paid for it. Here's the receipt. We're coming. The idea of this organisation is to protect the way of life of Gypsy people. Our ideal is to have a network of caravan sites which travelling people will be free to travel from one area to the next and carry on their business.
Evictions carried out by local authorities were now resisted with methods introduced by the new Gypsy Council.
The tactics weren't invented by the Gypsy Council, although we said, we shall not be moved. Local councils and the police didn't understand this, and so in the initial months and even years, the idea of a non-violent resistance, that's what we wanted to do. Direct action, in that it might be trespassing, but trespassing is justified when you've got nowhere else to go. You have to oppose the law when the law won't let you live.
But many house dwellers didn't want gypsies on their doorsteps. Residents of Bromley protested against their own council not evicting people from camps near their homes.
We're just completely fed up with it. We think the council let us down, the government has let us down. Why they can't be shifted out, heaven only knows.
I've made many complaints about it, but nothing seems to have been done.
Particularly the women, who are there naturally all day by themselves as a commuter country, well, they go in fear all the time the gypsies are there.
Fear of what?
Fear of molestation.
We've got rights to be here, but the council don't want us here. They want to destroy us. They talk in the way to make everybody believe the same old thing. The same old thing to make other people believe it. So they're all against the gypsies. Why is it? They just don't want us in the country. That's all it amounts to. They just don't want us in the country.
In Bromley, the council have tried to tackle the problem. They've provided one site on the top of a hill between a used car dump and the corporation rubbish tip.
Bromley did provide one permanent site for gypsies in 1968. But by now, there were barely a dozen official sites in the country. An estimated 200 were needed. The MP Eric Lubbock emerged as a new champion for gypsy rights. He pushed legislation through Parliament, which would offer hope for thousands of travellers.
The Act requires local authorities in England and Wales to provide sufficient accommodation for the gypsies who are residing in or resorting to their areas.
There were get-outs for the councils, but for the time being, there was cause for optimism.
Hertfordshire County Council has proved itself one of the most advanced in its thinking. So far, it's provided 8 sites, with the promise of more to come. This is the newest site, called 3 Cherry Trees, and 15 families are moving in this week.
This government film was aimed at councils and ratepayers alike.
You're clean, you've got hot and cold water, you've got toilets, you've got baths. So if you can't keep yourself clean in these things, where can you keep yourself clean? And I've travelled all my life, and now I'm trying to settle down.
The fact is that the travellers are queuing up for places here. And if our changing society isn't going to totally pressure out minority groups like the gypsies, then all authorities are going to have to follow the initiative taken by Hertfordshire.
I think there are lots of ways of looking at the 1968 Caravan Sites Act. There were obviously some people in government who saw it as a stepping stone to the assimilation of gypsies and travellers, to the ending of the traditional way of life. And some people on the pro-gypsy and traveller side who've justifiably had criticisms about the wording and some of the provisions. But many, many gypsy and traveller people are incredibly grateful for that act because it gave their families, in many cases for the first time in years, a secure place to stop and to put their trailers.
The future of many travellers looks like being this. At least these people are secure from being moved on. Mr. Motherseal, ex-police superintendent, now collects rents at the site for travellers at Godstone in Surrey. Rent here for a concrete slab, cold water tap, shared lavatories and washhouse, 25 shillings a week.
You know you're one of the best rent payers on the site.
I couldn't tell you that.
You are, you know, you've got one of the best books on the site.
It's the best to have a good name, ain't it?
Yes. We do foresee a hope for these young children. If they're taught to read and write and see a better way of life, they'll become much better citizens than the folk are today.
It's just a big difference, a massive difference between travelling the roads and going on a site.
Bill and Rachel Cooper now live on their own family land in Essex.
But we went to Appleby this year.
Yeah, we still get about a bit in that. And
when they stopped travelling in the 70s and first moved onto a council site, they found it hard to adjust.
Probably a lot of people that say, well, you don't know what you're talking about, you should be pleased to settle down. I suppose we got used to it after a while, you know. But it was a massive shock, you know, and I used to get depressed over it, to be honest with you. And I felt caged in and that, you know.
But afterwards, we liked it.
We got used to it, and we
made
made a life on there. And we was on there, how long was on there?
18 years.
18 years we stopped there, you know.
Until we brought this for our family.
You know, a gypsy man, or gypsy people, they was used to roaming, weren't they? It's just changed their life altogether, you know, going on the council site. Really and truly, they just will get a house and move into an house, really.
The old ways are changing, you cannot deny, for the day of the Romany's over. There's nowhere to go and there's nowhere to bide, so farewell to the life of the rover. Goodbye.
Despite the new Caravan Sites Act, councils were slow to provide pitches. By the mid-1970s, there were still 6,000 caravans with nowhere they could go.
They'll soon have machines and they're travelling queens, and their menfolk will have to be shifting.
But travellers who did manage to get a scarce council pitch would hang on to it and stay put. After centuries of travelling, Britain's remaining nomads were finally settling down.
Goodbye to the tent and the old caravan, to the tinker, the gypsy, the travelling man, and goodbye to the 30-foot trailer.
The vast majority of Romany people in Britain lived on the road, and that was seen as being synonymous with their selves, with their ethnicity. And so when they abandoned those accommodations for something else, many people thought that the people themselves had disappeared, which was not true. Which was obviously not true, and in fact there are probably more of us here than there ever have been.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
It's 1 o'clock on 5 Live this afternoon. Damien Labar is hanging out with us today, and he's hanging out with us because he has a question for you. Damien, give us the question again, my man.
My question is, why do some people think it's acceptable to be prejudiced against gypsies?
You won't be surprised, Damien, to know how many texts are coming in which have a very negative view of the traveller community. So many texts are coming in. And the themes are largely the same, which is about antisocial behaviour. And you are by no means speaking for the entire community, nor trying to defend the entire community.
Well, I can't, even if I wanted to, because how can I represent millions of people? I mean, we're in a position where people do think it's okay to judge from these experiences, a community of 9 to 12 million people globally, based on an interaction in a pub in Worcester on a Saturday night.
That there is a them versus us. There's the settled community and then there's the gypsy community. There feels that there is a real tension there, that the two communities find it very difficult to coexist side by side.
Well, there's definitely a tension, or I wouldn't be on here talking about it.
Well, of course I'm irritated when people expect me to answer for an entire people, because I can't. I can't, can I? It's astonishing. I think it directly springs from the history of racism against us, that approach. But, of course, that doesn't mean that Romany and traveller people don't do bad things, because of course they do. And often that's connected to poverty, marginalised living. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's connected to being a nasty piece of work. But I feel like people want me to confess that there's something inherently worse about us, and I'm not going to do that because I don't believe it. That we're just a more problematic group of people.
This is the flag of a nation. This is not the flag of a country. This is a flag of this is a world flag of a world nation.
Some gypsy people here are now building links with our Roma cousins across Europe and elsewhere. They share our common Indian origins.
Sean, come here a second. Would you just hold that about there?
Certainly can, Billy.
We're reasserting an ethnicity that perhaps has been overshadowed by centuries of nomadism in Britain.
Wherever we go in this world, people still say to us, why don't you lot go back to where you came from? So we still get that feeling that we don't belong.
500 trailers, 5,000 travelling people, 1,000 horses, a week of roaring holiday. But where do they go from here? Will they survive to lend colour and variety to an increasingly monotonous world, or must they conform? Must we all eat the same, live the same, think the same? Or are we big enough to allow that some people are different and welcome the difference?
Let's have a single cone, please, mate. Thank you.
The census of 2011 was the first to include us as a distinct ethnic group. It counted 63,000 Romany and Irish travellers in the UK. The numbers are likely to be much higher than that. 3 in 4 of us now live in bricks and mortar, and the vast majority of people living in trailers are on authorised sites.
We're just moving with the times, really.
Yeah, moving with the times and the...
My great-aunt Pam and Uncle Tony have lived through that transition to a more settled life.
When we moved to where we are now, people found it difficult to accept us till they got to know us. They thought we was travellers, don't talk to them, but once they got to know us, they're fine now. And that's how it's always been. Always will be, I suppose.
If you stop and you're on a site, or if you move into an house, you still got your heritage, you're still a Romany person.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Because you settle down, it doesn't mean to say that you're not a traveller, because you're a traveller by blood.
It was like when we moved into that bungalow, wasn't it? They said you're no longer a traveller because you're in bricks and mortar. How did they work that out?
Your blood's your blood. You can't change that, can you?
Take a leaflet, it's the Gypsy Traveller Network. The Gypsy Traveller Network.
Gypsies and Travellers Network, mate.
Legislation has moved on since the 1960s. Not all for the better from our perspective. A new generation is still campaigning against prejudice and for travellers' rights. And they're helping redefine what being a gypsy means in the 21st century.
I have memories when I was a child in the potato field picking with a basket at the front, and I think we was probably some of the last generations of young people to experience what life would have been like for people back in the 60s and to be taking part in them traditional trades and stuff. But yeah, I think it's changed massively in what we're doing. I think travellers generally are a lot more integrated into society. We're doing lots of different roles. I think we're not doing as many of the traditional ones we used to do. You know, we're just doing mainstream regular jobs, a lot of us.
I think because there's such a lack of understanding about our culture and our heritage in Britain, then you see the settled community seeing us as almost a nuisance rather than a pleasure to have in the community.
Yeah. Say all traveller and Romany culture dies, that doesn't necessarily mean the ethnicity doesn't exist anymore, whereas that's the way the media talks about it.
They're looking at it as a way of life rather than a people. Being a traveller is so much more than just moving. That's the issue, you know, it's your ethnicity.
Yeah.
Non-gypsies, or gorgers as we call them, still struggle to understand us as an ethnic group, but it's our self-belief that keeps us going.
I've always thought to myself, until the day when they ban everyone from the road, they'll never be able to stop us from travelling about.
We'd get round it. We'd just get tourists or even big caravans, because the gorge has got big trailers now and big caravans, and we just say we're going on our holidays when they pull us up. We don't think we're better than anybody. We don't think we're better than no one in this world, but nor do we think anyone else is better than us. And if they're entitled to do it, we're entitled to do it. So there's also the way around it.
We've actually seen in some footage of the fair from the 1960s, I believe it's your uncle.
My Uncle Jim, yeah. And I actually look like my Uncle Jim. So it would be nice for me and him to be in the same documentary, on the same fair, talking about the same things.
It's a way of life. It's something that's in us. We've been brought up this way. We live this way. It's part of us. Glamorisation, violins and that. We're the most down-to-earth people in the British Isles. And we're the only people that contain ourselves in a respectable manner.
I believe he said something about the worry of getting too assimilated, you know.
Exactly, but in his words, and I'm going to repeat the words because I learned a lot from the Uncle Jim. The thing is, it doesn't matter where we go in this world, or what country we're in, or what the circumstances are. We always survive, and we always maintain our way of life and our culture, because we are the most self-contained people in the world, and we can survive anywhere, and we can hang on to our culture anywhere, and we've proved it over thousands of years.
People have been saying for centuries that the old gypsy life was on the way out. It's painted as a way of life that's permanently in decay, whereas really it's just had to permanently reinvent itself. But as you can see, the people are still going strong. I always like to think the future's bright and that we'll find luck doing whatever we do, adapting, thriving. Whatever other people expect of us, we'll find a way to persist as a people.
On BBC Sounds, Greg Jenner dives into the BBC archives, stumbling across random dates, and listens to recordings to explore what they say about who we are now. Past Forward, a century of sounds.